Hello everyone, this is Professor Robert Solis and welcome to this next video lesson. We're going to be talking about subs and functions within Visual Basic. So let me switch over here to Visual Studio so that I can show you this sample application that I created. And in essence, what I'm going to be doing is adding two numbers. So that's why I asked the user to enter a string, not enter a string, rather enter an integer over here, and then we're going to add those two. In fact, let me just go ahead and run the program so you can see what it looks like. So let's say, for example, I enter 4 over here and 5 over here, and the addition of those two is 9. Okay, so no big deal, right, in terms of the functionality. But what's happening under the hood is important. So let me switch over here to the code area and describe to you what's happening. A sub is a collection of code. You can see over here the main program. When I click on a button, this is the code that's going to execute. All right, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to call upon this sub over here and also this sub over here. Well, first of all, what is a sub? A sub is a chunk of code. It's a chunk of code that's meant to do a particular procedure. For example, if I said, hey, what is the function of a mail carrier? Well, the function of a mail carrier is to deliver mail. What is the function of an auto mechanic? Well, to repair our cars, right? So we all know what the word function is. In Visual Basic, that's the only language that takes a function and kind of hyper redefines what that means into two separate parts. A function is a chunk of code that returns something, and a sub, like this, is something that we call upon, a chunk of code that we call upon, and it does not return anything. So in other words, when we call this thing called CalculateSome, and we're calling it a sub, which is an abbreviation for subroutine, when we call upon CalculateSub, it will do some task and then that's it. So I call upon it, do its task, and then that's it. So it's kind of like me asking it to do something. I don't have to worry about maintaining what that sub is doing because I know it's going to get its job done. So that's the first thing we do. When you create a sub, let me just go ahead and do this here. When you create a sub, you type in the word sub, space. Then you type in whatever the name of the sub is. So let's say that my job is to double it, right? So you send me a number and I'm going to double it. All right, so now we're within the parentheses. Now, within the parentheses, we call these things arguments. Arguments are just simply the things that I need to be able to do my job. If you want your sub to receive arguments, fine. If you don't want it to receive arguments, that's fine too. Watch this. So let me move to the end over here, press enter. So what I've done is I've created a sub, which is a chunk of code that's going to do something. What is it going to do? Well, based on this description, it's going to double a number. All right. Now, does it receive any parameters? Is it given anything so that it can do its job? Nope. Looks like within the parentheses, I have a blank. So therefore, when I call upon this and the code that I'm about to type, it should be able to take a number and double it. All right. Now, let me go further and illustrate the idea of arguments that are going to be passed to this sub, and then so that it can do its job. Now, there are two ways that you can move values to this sub so that it can do its job. One is to pass by value, and one is to pass by reference. All right, so what are the differences between the two? Well, when you use a word like this, by val, or by, which is an abbreviation for by value, in essence what you're doing is you're copying and pasting. So imagine that, I live here in Huntington Beach, and I like to play Frisbee golf. So imagine that I have a Frisbee. Okay, and I'm going to put a number on this Frisbee. I'm going to put the number 4, and I'm going to throw it to you. All right, if I throw you the original, and you're able to change the original number that I wrote down on the Frisbee, we call that pass by reference. In other words, pass by reference is when you have the original, you're able to modify it, and then maybe you want to throw it back to me, right? Or maybe you want to keep it. All right, pass by value, which is what we have over here. Pass by value is like me taking a Frisbee, cloning it, and I write something on the original, not the original, the Frisbee that I'm going to throw to you, because I'm going to keep the original because I just cloned it. And I throw you the Frisbee. Now you can catch that Frisbee and you can see the number that I wrote down on it, and you can even modify it. But I still have the original Frisbee. Okay? So pass by value is kind of like a copy and paste. You copy whatever it is that you're working with. In my illustration, it was a Frisbee. I throw you a Frisbee, the cloned Frisbee, and I keep the original. and you can modify the data any way that you want. You are not affecting the original, which is still in my possession. So over here, let's say that I want to pass a value to the subroutine or to the sub, and I'm just going to call it num1 as integer. Okay, and then within over here within the subroutine, the job is to double this number, say for example, and we're going to display it onto the label. Okay, so what I can do is this. Let's say I can take LBL result dot text. I'm going to convert this thing to a string because I'm putting numbers into a text box or to a label. I can't do that, so I got to convert it into a string to be able to put it into the text property. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to say 2 times whatever num1 is. I'm doubling it. And press enter. All right, so if I were to call this function called DoubleIt, it's going to receive, in this case, a number, specifically a whole number, and it's receiving a copy of it. It's not receiving the original. And so then it's going to take that number, double it, and then place it into the label. All right, so that's an example of a sub that receives one parameter. If it were going to receive 2 parameters, then you would just simply separate it with a comma like this. If you wanted to send 3 parameters, then you would put another comma over here and continue typing. Right, you can send as many parameters as you want. So parameters or arguments are those things within the parentheses that are used by the sub or by the function to do its job. So let's say to the auto mechanic, hey, I want you to replace my tire. Well, he's going to need a wrench, or he's going to need something to be able to take off those lug nuts to take the old tire off and put the new tire on. So he needs tools before he can do his job. Right? That's how it works out in terms of arguments. That's how you should think about it. All right, so what is a sub? A sub is a chunk of code that when you call upon it, it does some job. Now, the thing about a sub is that it does not return anything. In the next video lesson, when we talk about functions, then we'll talk about something being returned. We'll actually type the word return. Right? We're not going to do that in this context because subs don't return anything. Subs receive or possibly don't receive data, but they definitely do some task. All right, so in this case, I'm going to erase this because this is not part of this program. I just use that to illustrate what a sub is. But notice over here, I've created a sub. Notice that it does not have any parameters or any arguments. So what am I doing? I'm going to declare num1, num2, and sum. All of them are whole numbers. All right, I'm going to obtain the data from the text property of these text boxes and put them into these variables that I've just created, num1 and num2. I'm going to add them both together and then put the total into a variable called sum. And then I'm going to take that sum, which is an integer, convert that to a string, and put that into the text property of the label. So what this thing does is it's going to get the user input, it's going to actually perform a calculation, and then it's going to put that into the label. So let's see how this works. I'm going to stop the code right here. And let me run the program so we can investigate how it's going to work. All right, so let me put a number 3 and a number 4 in here. Click submit. Okay, so the number 7 appears. Wait a minute, let me see what happened here. It looks like it didn't even jump into this code here. What's going on over here? Oh, I see. So it looks like what's happening here is this. First, when I click this button, I'm declaring these variables, I'm getting the data, and I'm calling a sub called CalculateSome. Okay, so from here, I should really jump into the next line of code. So let me run the program again. I'll put 3 over here. I'll put 4 over here. Here we go. So we're stopping at this subroutine call. Now, to call this sub, it's also going to receive num1 and num2. As you can see, that's 3 and 4, the numbers that I entered. Let me go into that sub. So over here where it says step into, these are part of the debugging tools. If you don't see these, if you go to debug, window, and then you'll have all kinds of different panels. I like the autos panel, which is this one over here that I've pulled up. The autos panel just kind of shows you those variables currently at this frozen state of the program, what they are currently assigned. Num1 is assigned 3, num2 is assigned 4. Okay, I want to jump into the sub that I'm about to call, which is CalculateSome. So let's see over here. It looks like it's F11, or this button right here, step into. So I step into. Now we are inside of this routine, the subroutine called CalculateSome. Notice what it does. It receives 2 different whole numbers. I'm calling it num1 and num2. Now this is not the same num1 and num2 as back in my main program. This is the num1 that belongs to CalculateSome and the num2 rather that belongs to CalculateSome. Over here at the top of the program, this num1 and num2, they belong to the btn submit click routine. In fact, you see the word sub right there. All right, so just because they look the same, right, they have the same name, it's not the same individual item. Let's say that we are in at college, and there we have two different classrooms, and there's a Robert in one classroom, and there's also another Robert in another classroom. Are they the same Robert? No, it just happens to be they both have the same name. They could have the same last name. They could have the same look. They could be, identical twins. They're still individuals, right? And that's what the case is here. This is a num1 that belongs to CalculateSome. All right, so what am I doing inside of this sub? I'm going to declare sum. You gave me num1 and num2, as you can see over here and over here. I'm going to add those two together, and then I'm going to display the result inside of LBL result. So if I were to step over, so we're going to add those two numbers together. Here's the new calculation, 7. Let's place that 7 into the label. All right, so we assign that to the label. I'm just going to, now we are back over here at the original function call. And so if I were to click continue, it'll go back to the graphical user interface, and you'll see the number 7 there. Okay, so that is one approach to call a sub. That was one example, I should say, to call a sub with 2 arguments. But what if I wanted to call a sub with no arguments? And that's what I did over here. So let me comment this out. And therefore, we're not going to break over here. And I'm going to uncomment this. Now, check this out. Again, we are going to, it looks like we're obtaining the user input over here, but I don't think I have to do that because it looks like that's being done over here. So I think I'm going to comment out this line and this line right here. So I've changed my main program a lot. In fact, I don't even have to declare some variables. I can comment this and this out. So when I click this button, what is it going to do? It looks like it's just going to call this procedure, this sub called GetUserInput. And it doesn't receive anything, as you can see here from the empty parens. All right, so I click a button, I go to this, it's going to jump over to a sub, which again is a chunk of code that's going to perform some task. Well, what does this GetUserInput do? Well, let's see here. It looks like it's declaring 3 things, num1, num2, and sum. We are going to get the user input from the 2 text boxes, put it into num1 and num2. We're going to add those 2 numbers together, and then we're going to put the value of that sum into the text property of the label, so we'll have to convert that. So it's the same thing as what we're doing over here, but slightly different, because over here I received information, I received data, whereas over here I'm not receiving anything. So you need to obtain the data and add the numbers and then display it onto the label. Okay, so let me see what happens. So I go to sum. Actually, let me stop the program. Let me just show you what happens from this perspective over here. When I click this button, stop right here before I execute GetUserInput. So let's run the program. Let me put a couple of numbers in, 4 and 5. I'll click submit. And as you can see here, we've stopped the program at this subcall called GetUserInput. We're going to call it. It doesn't receive any information. I'm not sending anything to this sub. So let me go ahead and click this button over here called Step Into. And now we have stepped into this GetUserInput sub, which is a cluster of code here, chunk of code. All right, looks like I've declared num1, num2, and sum, and we've stopped the program right here. So let me go ahead and step over, and we've stopped it over here. It looks like we're going to take the input from the text box, put it into num1, and so that means that num1 is going to be 4, as you can see here. That's the number that I entered. Let me step over this. Num2 is 5. That's correct. We are about to add those 2 numbers, so let me step over, and it looks like the sum is 9. Yep, that's right. 4 plus 5 is 9. And now we're going to take that 9, convert it to a string, and put it into the text property of a label. So I'll step over. Okay, we are about to finish the sub. It's finished with its task, and so we go back to where it was called upon originally. And now let me just go ahead and click continue. And so that should take me back to the graphical user interface. 4 plus 5 is 9. All right, so in this chunk of code, you've seen 2 different ways of creating a sub. In this case, I have a sub that does not receive anything, has no parameters. And in this sub, it does have some parameters, namely 2 of them, 2 whole numbers, and then I can use them to do some task. In this case, they're both going to calculate the sum. Again, a sub is going to be a chunk of code that you call upon it to do some task. What if I said, create a function, or create a sub rather, that calculates the square root of the number that was entered by the user, or the a sub that's going to calculate the quadratic equation, right, based on A, B, and C, for example, that were entered by the user. I don't know, whatever. Whatever it is that you want to do. Calculate this person's taxes, calculate the sales tax, calculate if this person is above the legal age for drinking. I don't know, whatever you guys want to solve. A sub is a chunk of code that performs some task, and then when it completes that task, it goes back to the main program, which in this case is over here. And if there's other code beneath here, it'll execute that. Since we don't have any other code, that's why the program ends. And that's it. Okay. So this is Professor Robert Solis. I hope this video lesson was helpful. Have a good day. See you next time.